In ancient Greece, Aristotle imagined a world without servants. In his Politics, he wrote, "If every instrument could accomplish its own work, obeying or anticipating the will of others, if the shuttle would weave and the plectrum torch touch the lyre without a hand to guide them, chief workmen would not want servants nor masters' slaves." But back then, this was mythology. Today, these are everyday comforts. These tools exist, but we still yearn for the future of robots and self-driving cars. The question Aristotle could not answer is a huge dilemma in the 21st century. When machines can do our work, what happens to us? Yet, this question has cropped up throughout history. In 2023, technologists signed a letter calling for a 6-month pause on AI. Powerful AI systems, they warned, should be developed only once we are confident their effects will be positive. This letter grabbed headlines, but for some it reminded them of another letter. In 1964, there was a letter sent to Lyndon B. Johnson by prominent intellectuals about cybernation, making human labor obsolete. The Triple Revolution worried about jobs being automated away by machines and urged the government to step in. And 200 years before that, English textile workers protested automation by smashing machines with sledgehammers. Technology always draws headlines and protest. Today, we are tracing this fear of technology throughout history. This isn't just a story about technology, it's a story about 3 brilliant economists who witnessed their worlds being transformed by new machines and who reach very different conclusions. Join me as we understand why this fear keeps coming back and what history has to say about it. I'm Arnav Jindal, and this is Automation Anxiety. To understand David Ricardo's fears about machinery, you have to understand what Britain looked like in the early 1800s. This was the epicenter of the Industrial Revolution, and the transformation was staggering. In the textile mills of Lancashire and Yorkshire, new machines were performing tasks that had taken skilled artisans years to master. The power loom could weave cloth faster than any human. The spinning jenny multiplied what a single worker could produce. Steam engines were replacing water wheels, allowing factories to be built anywhere, not just along rivers. And the cropping frames, massive machines that finished wooden cloth, threatened to make an entire skilled trade obsolete. The men who operated the old hand-cropping shears were called croppers. They were elite craftsmen, well-paid, proud of their skill. And in 1811, they started fighting back. They called themselves Luddites, armed with the weapon of choice, a massive sledgehammer called the Great Enoch. They smashed machines across the English Midlands. The cruel irony? The sledgehammer was named after Enoch Taylor of Marsden, the blacksmith who manufactured both the hammers and the machines they destroyed. Their rallying cry, "Enoch made them, and Enoch shall break them." Things escalated to a point where the British government sent the army to crush this rebellion. Yet it sparked a conversation. People talked about how the Luddites weren't opposed to progress. They were terrified of starvation. The machines that made factory owners rich were making skilled craftsmen obsolete. Now into this context steps David Ricardo, a stockbroker turned economist. For most of his career, he believed what most economists believed, that machinery was good for everyone. Sure, it replaced some workers in the short run, but it made goods cheaper, expanded markets, and ultimately created more jobs than it destroyed. But in 1821, Ricardo did something remarkable. In the 3rd edition of his Principles of Political Economy, he added a new chapter called On Machinery. "I'm convinced that the substitution of machinery for human labor is often very injurious to the interests of this class of laborers." Ricardo's argument was structural. He distinguished between 2 types of capital: circulating capital, which is wages, workers, and fixed capital, which is machines and buildings. When jobs are automated away, circulating capital becomes fixed capital, and workers stop getting money. The owner grows rich. Same output, maybe more profit, but the workers starve. Ricardo was admitting the Luddites were right. The introduction of machinery could, in fact, harm the working class. Ricardo was not anti-technology, but he conceded that capitalism could distribute the benefits of technology and modernization unfairly. Marx was writing Das Kapital in the 1860s. The Industrial Revolution had transformed. When Ricardo saw the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, Karl Marx saw it mature. The cottage industries were gone. Railways crossed Europe. Iron and steel production had exploded, and the factory had become the dominant mode of production. Huge factories where steam-powered engines drove enormous belts and gears. Ricardo had seen a policy problem. Marx saw a failure of the system. Workers in poverty, while owners grew rich. Kids working 12-hour days. Skilled artisans obsolete. Marx divided capital into two parts: constant capital, which included machines, raw materials, and buildings, and variable capital, which is wages. Only variable capital, he argued, produces surplus value, because only human labor creates value beyond what it costs. Capitalist competition forces every firm to increase productivity to lower costs. The way to do that is to invest in more machinery relative to labor. The proportion spent on machines goes up, the proportion spent on wages goes down. The result is what Marx called the Industrial Reserve Army. A permanent pool of unemployed workers created by the system itself. It forms a disposable industrial reserve army that belongs to capital quite as absolutely as if the latter had bred it at its own cost. The Industrial Reserve Army, during periods of stagnation and average prosperity, weighs down the active labor army during the periods of overproduction and paroxysm. It holds its pretensions in check. In other words, the reserve army kept wages low. When workers demanded higher pay, employers could point to the masses of unemployed willing to take their place. When the owner needed more workers during a boom, a standby pool was ready. Mechanization wasn't just about efficiency, it was about control. It was about creating an underclass. Marx rejected the idea that the jobs created by the machines, like engineers, were sufficient. He argued they might not go to the displaced workers, they might not pay that well, there might be not enough for everyone who is displaced. For Marx, the machine wasn't neutral. It was, he wrote, a hostile power that strikes down the laborer. Automation anxiety wasn't irrational fear. It was a rational response to a system designed to extract maximum value while keeping workers dependent and vulnerable. Fast forward to the 1930s. John Maynard Keynes is watching a very different kind of economic catastrophe unfold. The Great Depression has led to 25% unemployment in America. But unlike Ricardo and Marx, Keynes doesn't primarily blame the machines. He blames the system's failure to manage itself. By the 1930s, the technologies of production were far more advanced than anything Ricardo or Marx had witnessed. Electricity had transformed manufacturing. Assembly lines pioneered by Henry Ford had revolutionized production. Communication technologies like the cell phone linked global markets. Agricultural machinery had multiplied yields. And yet, people were starving. The economic system had broken down. Factories sat idle. Workers who wanted to work couldn't find jobs. Keynes thinks this is a failure of coordination and writes an essay called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. In it, Keynes coins a phrase: "We are being afflicted with a new disease of which some readers may not yet have heard the name, but of which they will hear a great deal in the years to come, namely technological unemployment. This means unemployment due to our discovery of means of economizing the use of labor, outrunning the pace at which we can find new uses for labor." But Keynes was optimistic. To him, technological unemployment was a short-run adjustment problem, not a permanent condition. Growing pains towards abundance. UAW President Walter Reuther captured this paradox perfectly in the 1960s. When an auto executive pointed to his automated assembly line and taunted, "I'd like to see you collect union dues from these babies," Reuther replied, "First, I'd like to see you make them buy automobiles. Robots can't buy cars. Workers need wages to buy the goods made by factories." The solution wasn't to smash the machines or even slow their adoption. The solution was to manage aggregate demand through government spending, monetary policy, and the stabilization of investment. Keynes imagined a utopian future. For Keynes, technology wasn't the enemy. It was humanity's ticket to abundance and leisure. The challenge? Managing the transition, ensuring the benefits of productivity gains were shared, and that economic system didn't collapse under its own instability along the way. If Ricardo was worried about the structure of capital and Marx worried about the structure of power, Keynes worried about the structure of demand. Fix that, and he believed technology would become our liberator, not our replacement. We are now in the modern day, 2025. Today, we have immense data on how tech innovations have changed the way we live. We've gone through crazy technological innovations like the internet now. And modern economists Daron Acemoglu and Pascal Restrepo have developed what they call a task-based framework for understanding how technology affects labor. The key insight: technology doesn't simply replace workers, it reshapes what workers do. Some technologies automate existing tasks, displacing the workers who perform them. This is the Ricardian concern, the conversion of wage fund into fixed capital. Other technologies create entirely new tasks that require human labor in ways that didn't exist before. Think of all of the jobs that exist today that didn't exist 30 years ago. Social media managers, app developers, drone operators, data scientists. The empirical evidence is nuanced. Acemoglu and Restrepo's research on industrial robots, defined precisely as automatically controlled, reprogrammable machines capable of tasks like welding, painting, and assembly, found real displacement effects. Between 1990 and 2007, each additional robot per 1,000 workers reduced the unemployment to population ratio and lowered wages in exposed areas. Marx's reserve army may not have been real, but so was Keynes' new task creation. The net effect has varied dramatically by time period, by technology, by region, and crucially, by policy choices. They found that from 1947 to 1987, automation destroyed about 17% of tasks while creating about 19% in new ones. Roughly balanced, but from 1987 to 2016, destruction stayed at 16%, while creation dropped to just 10%. That imbalance explains stagnant wages and falling labor share of income. Consider ATMs. Since the 1970s, America installed over 400,000 of them. Bank teller jobs should have collapsed from the automation. Instead, they increased from about 250,000 to nearly 600,000 by 2010. ATMs reduced tellers per branch from 20 to 13, but bank opened 43% more branches because they were now cheaper to operate. Teller jobs shifted from cash handling to relationship banking. Or consider Germany, which has far more industrial robots than the United States. Research found zero aggregate job losses. Each robot destroyed 2 manufacturing jobs, but these were completely offset by service sector gains. The difference? German unions traded wage cuts for job security. As one study concluded, no one was really fired because of a robot, but many swallowed wage cuts. During the power loom revolution, 98% of labor required to weave cloths was automated, yet total weaving jobs actually increased because prices collapsed and demand soared. But the transition devastated individual workers. Handloom weavers saw wages collapse from 20 to 30 shillings per week, down to just 5 over 2 decades. The long run was glorious. The medium and short run, brutal. So where does this leave us? Here we are, watching large language models write code and generate images, wondering, is this time different? We have Waymos driving themselves. AI is unbeatable at chess. The military is deploying AI robot drones. Maybe artificial intelligence really does represent a break from everything that came before. A technology that can learn, adapt, and potentially improve faster than we can retrain? Or maybe we're living through another chapter of the same story. Workers fear displacement, owners promise efficiency, economists debate whether the gains will be shared or hoarded. So who was right? Ricardo, who saw displacement as a structural problem? Marx, who saw it as a weapon of class warfare? Keynes, who saw it as a temporary growing pain on the way to abundance? The honest answer? Everyone is right, partially. Displacement is real. Ricardo was right about that. It does serve to discipline workers and depress wages. Marx was right about that. And in the long run, societies do adapt and grow richer. Keynes was right about that. What Ricardo, Marx, and Keynes teach us is that the outcome isn't determined by the technology itself. It's determined by the economic and political systems that shape how technology is deployed and who benefits. Technology may be deployed and only go to the rich who control the capital and control the technology. But if deployed successfully, society at large can benefit. The variable that matters most isn't the technology itself, it's the institutions. Unions, training systems, safety nets, political choices. These determines whether the gains are shared or hoarded, whether transitions are managed or left to market, whether workers are retrained or abandoned. Aristotle imagined a world where a shuttle weaves itself and a master needs no slave. We're closer to that world than ever. The question isn't whether we'll get there, it's who gets to be the master and who ends up feeling like the machine. I'm Arnav Jindal. Thank you for listening to Automation Anxiety.